Hey guys, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to those of you that are dialing in around the world. This is the final session of TMF week of day 2, or the panel session. Fran, if I can ask you to just stop sharing your screen so I'm able to share mine. That would be great, thank you. So today we will be covering, I think, one of the most exciting subjects of the day, and a real build-up, I think, from all of the other sessions that preceded the sessions today. So we're going to be tackling the universe of startup records. How do we make it easier? And it's going to be a panel discussion, and we're going to be joined by a number of amazing speakers. But before I get into those speakers, I'm just going to again remind everybody of the housekeeping. All of the sessions will be recorded, so this session, including all of the other sessions that you may have missed, are recorded and available to everybody on the platform. It does take us a little bit of time to put that recording up, so if once it's up, you'll be able to view it and kind of go back to it. All of the attendees, again, for TMF Week will receive a certificate of attendance for the overall conference. This is an interactive panel. Not only do we have amazing people speaking and discussing these topics from the TMF Week team, but we also want your participation as well. So if you have questions, things you would like to contribute to the conversation, throw them into the chat, throw them into the Q&A area. Everybody wants to hear from you as well. Following each presentation, for those of you that have had a chance to attend some of the networking breaks, we do have a virtual lounge where you're able to have a video conversation with a group of individuals. We had a fascinating discussion just before this session. If you want to network in the TMF space, this is a really great place to do it, to meet new people, to connect with new TMF professionals. So with that, what I'll do is I'll introduce our team today. We're still waiting on a few individuals to join. Internet issues, as virtual conferences are. But we have our panelists today moderated and led by Fran Ross, who's a TMF Practice Director at Advanced Clinical. We have Seneca Harrison, who is joining us shortly from Quality Clinical Research. We have Radwa Ali, who's the Director of Clinical Research at George Washington Medical Faculty Associates. And then we have Etienne Hinton, who's the Clinical Trial Coordinator at Duke Clinical Research Institute. So lots and lots of really great site experts on today's call, as Fran references in the chat. So with that, I'm going to stop my sharing, and I'm going to add these fabulous people to the panel. Hey, fabulous people.
Hello.
Amazing. So Fran, you're able to share your screen. As for the audience, and obviously I introduced Seneca. Seneca's having some issues joining, so we'll add Seneca in when we can. So Fran, you're good to go.
Fantastic. Hi everybody, really so appreciative of everyone coming to this panel session, so appreciative of the site experts who are with us. This TMF is all about the records, from a sponsor perspective, and the sites drive so much of the activity that we need to have supported by these site folks. The sessions earlier today were really great, and if you didn't have an opportunity to participate in them, do listen to the recordings. They were really wonderful experts about what is the boundary between TMF and ISF, and how do we solve for that boundary? What is the study startup problem, and how do we solve the study startup problem? And I've got a particular passion that I want to share with everybody, and then turn the floor over to the panelists. Particular is such an interesting word to use. Going back to my deck here. When I've been thinking about TMF for way too many years, I started out at a site, I went to the sponsor, I was a eClinical consultant for way too long, and now I'm at a CRO, so I've done everything but eClinical vendor side. I think they'd prefer if I stayed away from there. It occurred to me most recently, when I've been reflective of the work of the TMF reference model, that one of the things we missed was focusing on the real situation, the clinical trial participants who I've now labeled human heroes, the people who give up of their body and their time to deliver us the data on an experimental basis, these folks need our attention and support, I believe, number one. The human heroes who are the clinical trial participants, it is the heart of everything we do. And reflecting on that heart, put a new sort of bear claw together, saying, industry, perhaps we can re-examine the taxonomies that we've structured to directly reflect the most critical part of a clinical trial, and that's the folks who participate. From the folks who participate, that we can then go out to the human healers, the doctors and nurses and other medical experts that help those heroes when they have a medical problem. From then we can build on to the site trialists who do the remarkable work of running clinical trials, many of them when they're also trying to support a health journey. From there, we then move up to the sponsors who are funding and running clinical trials at the speed of sound. From there, we move up to the global health authorities who are desperate for the data as quickly as they can get it so they can approve new medications to help those human heroes. And then above that is technology, the likes of which we've never seen before on the planet. I've labeled this the universe of decentralized trials because I believe that the pandemic has given us an opportunity to adjust our taxonomy and move at the speed of light when it comes to managing records for clinical trials. I believe if we examine the journey of all of these individual groups, and maybe we need reflections from all of their different perspectives, we could then have a taxonomy that reflects everybody in this universe and move much more quickly, collecting the trial data, collecting the trial records, collecting all of it if our taxonomy can be smoothed out. So I believe the next wave of TMF standardization needs to focus either from the top down or the bottom up, start at the heart or start in the clouds. I don't think it matters. I have lots of ideas, but I don't have answers. I believe that the focus on the human heroes first, it clearly is a very strong passion of mine. Having lost several people that I love to cancer and knowing that the trials weren't available for their journeys, I am willing to walk on glass to make this journey easier for those folks who are able to join clinical trials, and all the way up from there. And again, top down, bottom up, from the inside out or the outside in, I don't think it matters. What is critical, though, is to get ahead of our taxonomy problem and get it solved once and for all. Well, that's a strange statement. I believe we can solve the taxonomy problem once, and then we'll have to refresh it all the time. You're never done with the taxonomy, for sure. My bio hero is Henri Tremere, who's originally from the Netherlands and moved him and his family to Massachusetts and started Genzyme, the biotech where I grew up. Henry, I believe, fiercely believed that if you do the right thing, the money will follow. And learning that lesson early on as I was exposed more and more to ICH and all of the regulations we have to attend to, I cannot thank or honor Henri any more than I do on a daily basis. So what does this mean? There's a lot of meat here, and I'll just share this deck with you all later because we want the sites to really take the floor now. The pandemic was horrid, and the pandemic has delivered us an opportunity. I feel very passionate about taking advantage of this opportunity to redevelop our taxonomy. Oliver, I'm going to stop there and turn the floor over to our beautiful panel.
Should we,
And your first question?
Oh, you want me to ask the first question? Radwa, ATN, thank you for joining. Radwa, will you give the crowd a little bit of background on you? And same for ATN, and then I'll ask you 100 questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everybody. It is such a delight and such an honor for me to be here with you all today. My name is Radwa Ali, and I am joining you from Washington, D.C. with the George Washington University. I lead the Clinical Research Unit here specifically for the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery, but also in the grand scheme of things institutionally as well.
So I'm Etienne Hinton. I am a TMF Systems Specialist at the Duke Clinical Research Institute. So most people know us as Duke. And because of the multiple hats that we wear, we can be a site, we can be a CRO, we can also be the sponsor. A lot of times we can do all three, but we are the world's largest ARO. I've been here, I'm actually in Clayton, North Carolina, which is probably about 25 minutes from Raleigh, which is what most people may know about. But I've been in clinical research for probably about 10 years now. I worked at, as a lot of people did, I worked at Quintiles before it became IQVIA. I worked at a much smaller CRO, Health Decisions, and then I've been at Duke for the past few years, developing processes with our TMF, as well as our other systems of managing the documentation for drug studies.
Thank you. Etienne, can you define ARO for us? Not everyone might be HEP. Do the young people say HEP anymore? Might not be aware of what that acronym stands for.
It is actually an academic research organization where a lot of the stuff is built around the research and the documentation of that research.
So like the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute is part of an ARO that runs cancer trials around the world, aligned with the NIH. AROs are awesome, and Duke is the monster ARO. Yes, and by monster I mean huge and awesome, not scary.
Right, I like that.
And welcome, Seneca. I'm so glad you're here with us. We're giving the crowd a little bit of background, and I'm typing the notes up for anybody that joins in a little bit.
Sorry I'm late. I was having some issues here. Seneca Harrison, CEO of Quality Clinical Research. I am a site network here in Omaha, Nebraska, and expanding into Iowa. We do everything from the common cold to prostate cancer is like what we like to say. We also have a small phase 1 unit, and we also do inpatient at our hospital. So study startup is definitely in our wheelhouse. This is what we do all the time and can give you the perspective of the sites and the tedious and the pain that we experience down here at the site level.
Seneca, you're also part of an organization of a nonprofit that has a bunch of different sites. Will you just talk about the globality of what you're doing, what that alignment is? Yeah,
so the organization is called HyperCore, and it is 180 sites across Canada, United States. I think we have Ecuador, Puerto Rico. There's a bunch of small South America countries that we are now part of. And we're trying to make study startups start easy, one contract throughout all 180 sites. Our objective is we're better together instead of individual islands. That's the way I like to say it, in this big ocean of research. And so we're coming together and form one mass. And I think the unique thing about us, it's a lot of leaders who have been in the site level for many years. I've been doing this since 2004. Some of these guys have been doing this since 2000. And for us to come together like this is kind of unheard of. A lot of chiefs is like what I like to say. So a lot of arguments, I won't say arguments, but discussions of how to make things streamlined so a CRO or a sponsor can come and just knock it out the park for them on a site level. So, yeah.
A participant asked, Etienne, what's the difference between an ARO and a CRO? And I think the answer is in the definition of an ARO.
Yeah, so the biggest difference that I can think of when you start thinking about ARO and CRO, ARO is about the research and it's academic. CRO is, a contract research organization. So though Duke is in it to make money, it's not the main thing. So we're not about the we're not just about making money. We're about making some money while we get the research right.
The Duke mission is teaching and training and improving the science understanding, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Same mission
Correct.
for Harvard, same mission for GW. At the base of it, it's to grow new doctors and nurses to help the humans get healthier faster.
Correct.
Academic, publish or perish. All right, I'm gonna ask right now, what do the sponsors need to do, our friends, to help you all solve the paper madness? Rodwell, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, for starters, let's minimize the paperwork. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, I mean, I don't actually have to tell you. I think everybody here on this panel is aware of, you know, the overwhelming number of paperwork. The moment you get that letter that says that you've been selected as the site, you are inundated with forms and paperwork to complete. And I think that already sets the tone of, okay, let me step back for a second. For an already busy research coordinator, I think you just sort of step back and think, okay, I don't know where to start right now, and so I'm just going to push this aside. I think that starts the delay in and of itself. I know that we're moving towards many more electronic versions of these documents and centralizing some of these documents, but it's still a lot. You know, a lot of sites, although are moving towards eReg, for example, eReg binders, they're still not using them, you know, or we still have to get the paperwork because for the institution, it's a financial cost to be able to purchase an eReg system, right? And so even though they're there, you know, you're still having to do a lot of the wet ink and scanning and tracking down the doctor and tracking down every coordinator and research assistant and phlebotomist and whoever it is that's going to be involved in this study. And so there's a lot of paperwork that I think that we can do away with initially.
I completely agree with Rodwell. If there were ways to consolidate some of the information that we continue to, when we fill out multiple forms, there should be some ways to make it so it's a lot more electronic, number one. But number two, even when we physically have to have paper, make it less documentation. And that way it wouldn't be quite so cumbersome to participate in studies because of the documentation that we all have to fill out as, you know, as participants. There's so much duplication as far as documentation. And if we could, you know, streamline some of that, make it less paper and more electronic, as we've all seen with the pandemic. You know, a lot of people aren't in the office anymore, or weren't in the office before things started opening back up. But it will be easier if you didn't have as much paper. Period.
And I would add to what everyone else has just said. I think in the perfect scenario, something like Gabulta would be a universal dumping for all sites. And if all sponsors and CROs use something, and I'm not an advocate for Gabulta or anything like that, but that's just the latest system that is out there. But if everyone would pull from that one dumping ground, that would make life a hell of a lot easier. You know, we went to eRegs and eSource, and that has streamlined us a lot more. Now, on the other end, we get the CRO saying, whoa, why do we need a password from you? And I always say, well, you give us about 10 of them. So, you know, we're kind of like, I give you one password and you have access to our data, but, you know, I have eRegs and EDC and all the other stuff that we have passwords for. But getting them on, I think the pandemic really showed them that having eSource or eRegs, really helps. You know, they were able to access, you know, the monitors were able to access it from their own home versus coming out to our office. And our point of doing it ourselves versus I know other sites are hesitant or have not jumped on that was when you come to our site, my coordinator's time is valuable and my PI's time is valuable. So let's talk about the critical stuff, worrying about the 1572 or the financial disclosure. All that can be discussed over emails because you're already in my portal, which is real time in Creo. Let's work about the nuts and bolts about the trial. Either it's an amendment update that we have to do, or it's something else. On the sponsor side, or the CRO side, it would really be nice if there was a universal dumping ground. Hey, go in and update your PI CVs every 2 years or every year, however way you want it to. Financial disclosures. I'm dreaming now, but there would be one financial disclosure a year for everybody. I know 1572s are more designed for each individual studies, but maybe pre-populate those. That would help us a little bit more too. But a universal dumping ground, until that is available, if that ever happens, I think for us, it's really the e-reg route that has really helped us. And I think we'll continue doing that because I can get anyone from the CRO sponsor access, and you can go in that and you can get the critical information you need without my coordinator emailing you or scanning in or you waiting to the visit.
Or walking the document a mile to get to the FedEx. Oh,
yes.
The stories. Let me ask each one of you, and Seneca, we'll start with you. There's a beautiful question from Jennifer Wilson, a specific example or an experience, a story that illustrates where the gaps and efficiencies are. So if you could call out the exact record type, 1 or 2 record types, and tell us a story, your worst story is beautiful, about how the sponsors have added to the site burden for record keeping. Seneca, we'll start with you, or if somebody else is so excited.
Right off the back, I would say a frustration for us would probably be either the 1572 or delegation logs are the number one pains. 1572s, we need to come with a standard. Do we want coordinators on it? Do we want PIs on it? What do we want on this thing? I mean, because if you want coordinators on it, then it translates to financial disclosures or personal data consents. I mean, let's make a standard. I know the FDA came out many moons and kind of made a recommendation, but I would love this is black and white and we're going to do this. That is my everyday headache. Delegation logs, that I don't, we went digital with ours, which is nice, but I still haven't wrapped my head of how to correct that, because that is a ever-evolving document. You have staff leave, you add people on, you have staff that doesn't leave, but they're brought on to a whole different program, so they're not part of that anymore. That's a real big burden on the coordinator, I know. And I'm still trying to figure out how to ease that burden on our coordinator, and that might be my biggest headache when it comes to things. So I'll pass the button.
Thank you. And I'm furiously typing in chat, both reflecting what you're saying and thinking with the consultant brain. How can we fix it? Radwa, you were nodding and smiling. Go.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with Seneca. I think the 1572s is probably, I have 2 comments, but in response to Seneca's is one of my biggest frustrations, because you're absolutely right. There is no standard rule or understanding of who should be added onto this 1572. But I think more importantly, what I found is that there's a disconnect between what the CRO thinks and the CRO that I'm communicating with versus what the sponsor wants. And so there are times where a CRO or a monitor will say, don't worry about it, you don't have to add that person. The sponsor looks at it, and now I have to do it all over again because they actually want it. And so I think that not only should we have a standardized rule across the board for what you want the sites to do, but I think that there needs to be a better understanding between the sponsors and the CROs and what their expectations are. But I think my horror story or moment of frustration is the amendments that happen in the middle of the startup process. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to get a protocol signature page or an IB signed, and we're getting ready to go, and then I get another email, saying we have a protocol amendment. Let's start all over again. Yeah. That's very frustrating and can add a significant amount of delay.
The biggest I'll add on to that is you didn't start on amendment 3. You started on amendment 5, and then you have a monitor comes in and says, well, you need to sign amendment 3, 4, and 5.
Yes.
Right. We didn't start there.
Why don't you have amendment 3 documents in here? And it's like, but I didn't work on it. I didn't even have IRB approval before it, which then also speaks to the disconnect between the monitor and the CROs and what the sponsor wants.
Yes.
Yeah. What do sponsors want? Like, what do sponsors want? I think one of the things, having spent way too many years at a sponsor and seeing very busy clinical trialists run like the speed of light, I think one of the problems is demanding that study start hit time point X without saying plus 2 weeks for us to smooth everything before we get site side. Industry, take the 2 weeks. It's going to move you faster. I promise. ATN, please go.
Oh no, they've already taken all of the worst documents. But the delegation of authority, or SSDSL, whatever your company may call it, it is the document that you have key personnel, you have your PI, your sub-I, and then sometimes you have coordinators, sometimes you don't, and it gets very cumbersome trying to figure out who's supposed to be here and then which document that person is supposed to have. Because a lot of times, if you're just a standard coordinator, you might only require a GCP and an HSP. Or if you're, the coordinator who is key personnel, then you also require a COI or an FDF. I'm sorry, I'm throwing a bunch of acronyms out. You might require financial disclosure, a conflict of interest, or multiple documentation for that one person when, and then you get to the point where, this study started 2 years ago, but you only need one medical license. So now you don't have to go back in and update that because, I guess once they were a doctor, we don't need a new medical license because they're still a doctor. So sometimes the documentation that we're supposed to supply becomes extremely redundant, even though you don't necessarily need it. So it's just the amount of duplication is enormous sometimes. That's all.
I'm going to hit y'all with the bus. Beep, beep, here comes the bus. My idea from a consultant perspective is that a decision tree is going to be very helpful for the sponsor and CRO to navigate. And idea number 1. Idea number 2 is bake into the contracts the principles that you all need to be able to get your job done without spending extra weeks and burning the time of an expensive doctor or other resources. The number 1 idea, maybe I can challenge you all or Seneca, your consortium, or get all together in whatever fashion pleases you to think about the problem of 1572 and delegation of authority. I think it's the same problem. Who's responsible for what component of the trial? Once you've decided for that trial, who's responsible for what component, what goes into the 1572 and what goes on the delegation of authority log gets solved quickly. But it has to be asked for every trial, right? That's the beauty of working in experiments. You got to refresh it for each trial. If you all have a decision tree, the sponsors and the CROs can then take the time that's required to look at the protocol and say, what are we asking? Who is going to do what from a site perspective to our beautiful human heroes? And then come back to you and say, this is what goes in the 1572, this is who goes on delegation of authority. It's an idea. I'm not sure it'll work, but it can't hurt. Number 2, bake into your contracts the seriousness for the sponsors of what it takes for you to get your jobs done. Make the sponsors pay additional money when the sponsor and CRO miscommunication divide costs you guys more time and effort. Sponsors of the world, I'm sorry for telling the sites to do that, but money moves mountains. And If it costs you guys more time because the sponsor and CRO haven't been efficient, that burden shouldn't be on you. It should be back to the sponsor and CRO. Efficiencies are driven by the dollar or the yen or the pound or the whatever cashola you use. So 2 ideas. We had, I think, another question. Seneca or Radwa, Etienne, if you want to reflect on what I just said while I'm searching for questions here.
I do agree. I mean, money does move. We can get into budgets and contracts all day. I think it's just it really boils down to expectations and communication. I know when we're dealing with, the regulatory people, when they first start off, they're probably sending out, 100 of these emails in a mass email, and they're getting different feedback back. To me, it's just getting me the critical information right away so that we can get the forms. I mean, it's a standard process for the individual sites. Someone's running around finding signatures. In our case, it's electronic. So, making sure all the physicians have used their iPhone or whatever it is to sign off on. But I think it's just the time that their expectations is, if that's communicated early, then we can do what we need to do in a faster time, or at least just be honest and say, you know what? This one doctor only comes in every 2 weeks, or he's on vacation for a month, and it's going to slow up everything.
So let's get him a device where he can sign with his pinky.
Well, and that's another reason why we went to electronic everything, was because I can call him up on the golf course and say, hey, you need to log in and put your fingerprint in and sign off on this document because of that. But I think communication and expectations up front is the biggest thing for me.
There's a delicious question from one of the participants asking if you believe the sites would be open to an electronic delegation of authority log. I'm going to pick on Radwa because, she's smiling and nodding right away. I'm going to follow up then and ask you all what percentage of paper you're still dealing with. I just wanted to warn you about that question. Radwa, do you believe the sites would be open for an electronic delegation of authority log?
Absolutely. Speaking on behalf of my site, we would absolutely be open to an electronic delegation log. I think it'll be much easier to manage for version control. I think it'll be much easier to make changes to it and add folks and send it off to whoever we need to send it off and save it wherever we need to save it. Certainly the paper trail is the actual paper document. I think that makes things really difficult.
Etienne, what's your perspective on an electronic DOA?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that really fast. So, yes, an electronic delegation of authority would make things a lot easier and smoother because unfortunately, if, one happens to get lost or misplaced and it doesn't have this person on it, but it was supposed to have this person, and then you have this documentation that is incomplete. So an electronic version would help a lot with version control as well as ease of use.
Seneca, you guys already doing EDOAs and the sponsors just haven't caught up to it yet?
That's probably a whole nother panel of electronics are putting things, I don't even know what I want to say. Yes, we need it. Let's use something, I'm going to take it a step further and say, let's use something that is more universal instead of each study having its own. So if we have a CRO, and I'm going to use DocuSign because it seems like that's one of the biggest things. If that was a way we can use DocuSign, let's just make it the whole CRO does that. Not some studies and, they go back here. I mean, if that's going to be the policy for one study, let's be it all for the whole CRO. So then when I work with whatever CRO that is, I know what I'm going to expect. I'd be most likely wanting to pick the work with them because it is so easy to have electronic DOA, or not DOA. I'm sorry.
Yes, DOA. No,
Yes.
totally good.
But yes, it would be helpful. Otherwise, we're going to continue using ours. And I mean, I think that's where I'm at is I realize there may not be an opportunity to everyone to sync up. So if I have mine, so it will at least save my sanity for my staff.
I think the pandemic has delivered us an opportunity
Yes.
to say, okay, everybody needs to use their own thing, but if the taxonomy is solved, we don't need to worry about who's using what next Tuesday.
No.
There are going to be new technologies. It's going to happen. There's a journey to start by developing a better taxonomy that supports all of the different perspectives in clinical trials, because it's a pretty big universe. There's a lot of different perspectives to take care of. Number one. Number two, I'm going to ask you all about what the paper burden is still today, and ask the sponsors to lean in and listen to the sites talking to you about what they still have to do, pandemic irrespective, what they still have to do with paper. Rodwa, and you might have had another reflection on something else, Rodwa, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to Seneca's point. I think the key takeaway is communication. I think communication between the sponsor and the CRO, and so that the CRO can better communicate with the sites. Where I often find a lot of delays is I'll ask the CRO because the sponsor becomes this sort of off limits. We can't really reach out to them. We have to go through the CRO. They become this sort of invisible team of people. We don't know who we're working with, even though we're working ultimately for them. But we're going through the CROs, and frankly, and I don't know if it's the monitor's fault or where the training or the disconnect or miscommunication happens, but then I'll find that my CRO doesn't have the answer or misdirects me or misguides me. So I think I agree with Seneca, and communication is incredibly important. That three-way communication between the sponsor, the CRO, and the site, and then back to them.
Definitely.
I am typing, CROs need the better ability to know and deliver what their sponsors need the first time around. The sites need it, the accurate and direct information the first time you're requested to deliver anything, any record.
One small thing on that is sometimes communication is huge, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. But sometimes the sponsor doesn't necessarily know exactly what they want, and unfortunately, trying to go through the CRO to get what they want when they don't necessarily know exactly what they want becomes difficult, because the communication then changes. They're like, well, that's what we told you, but that's not what you said, and you start trying to defend the actions as being in the middle, trying to get the sponsor what they want when they say, well, this is what I wanted, and you say, well, here's what you asked for, and they say, no, that's not what I wanted, and then you go and then unfortunately there's a back and forth that starts, and it's like, well, the CRO is mad with the sponsor, but then the site is trying to give the CRO what they're asking for, and it just becomes this communication cyclone, and people are trying to defend what they tried to do because this is what you said you wanted. And so clear communication is probably what I would say we need to make sure we have. Clear communication, a clear understanding of what you want. Because when you're talking to the sponsor, you say, this is what you said you wanted, and this is how I'm giving you what you said you wanted. Now, if that changes, a lot of times the sponsors, big and bad, are like, well, that's what I said. And you're like, well, I'm trying to give you that. And then it becomes difficult for even the site to do that, because then it's like, well, I gave you what you asked for, but now you're asking for something different. And so, like I said, clear communication is, I think, very important.
Absolutely. The problem is real. We're running clinical experiments on human beings, and so things are going to change, and none of you, I believe, have any objection to things changing because new information comes in. It's the problems that drive people crazy. It's having one person say, you just need the nurses and the docs on the 1572, and then the other party saying, no, 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 we need the site coordinators on the 1572. It's the do-over that can get solved by better amounts of trust and time. Sponsors and CROs need to trust each other a little bit more, take a little bit more time before you get the sites churning on these records that aren't the critical records. The critical records are the ones that involve the subjects, right? Our human heroes. Seneca, do you have a reflection, number one, and number two, can you tell us how bad the paper problem still is?
Paper problem for us is slowly being eliminated. Now the rework digitally, that has not gone away. But since we have eRegs and eSource, we went ahead, I want to say this was probably 2016, that we have started the eRegs. Paper is minimum. And it's a good thing because now we don't have file cabinets full of reg binders and reg binders stuffed to the brim. But I know from past, paper was the worst. I mean, the worst fear was to have an FDA audit and pull out 13 reg binders and say, I pray to God everything is in here still, you know, because, you know, I've been through that versus digital. You know, now you just want to make sure everything is labeled right and that you have an SOP of how to label everything. So digital creates its own work. But the paper is a lot less. And, you know, I understand that is a strategic move for us. Not all sites will make that move or less forced to, and all sites may not have that ability to afford one of those systems. But if you can, I highly do recommend it because I'm not sure that it will get pushed down from the sponsor or the CRO level, or you'll be working with 15 different portals to upload your documents versus I have my own. You're going to work with this if you want to work with us, and then go from there.
Beautiful. Etienne, you want to jump in, please?
Yes, so I can say that paper is, like Seneca said, it is more minimal. Where the issue with paper is coming in, it is your legacy studies, your studies that have been going on for years that started out in paper, that stayed in paper because it would have been too much of an undertaking to scan in all of the documentation that you already had for those studies, for the different sites, and trying to get it in an electronic version, whether you're using, you know, the standard naming convention or anything like that. It's still the manpower that it would take to take a study that's been going on for years and move it to all electronic. So it is going away. And so going forward, there will be more of a push as far as an electronic, you know, TMF and electronic file. But yeah, paper is going away. And it's as those studies that started in paper are going away, we're getting away from it. But it's still a bear dealing with some of those studies because they have so much paper, because they've been going on for so long.
Do you have a percentage, Etienne, or
No.
a measurement?
No.
We'll move along. Rodwa, do you have a paper reflection for us?
Yeah, so our site is actually a little bit different. We are still, I would say, probably about 90% paper, and that is because we had a pretty archaic EMR. We are in the process of transitioning, and through that process, we are also now exploring our eReg options, our CTMS options. So the hope in the next year is that we'll significantly move away from paper. We'll continue to be a hybrid site. But I would say we will likely be about 70% electronic.
Yay!
Those transitions. But I think to Seneca's point, and Etienne said it at some point as well, you know, it's making sure that sponsors will be okay if we're going to invest the money in a third-party vendor. We want to know that the sponsors are going to be okay using it. And I will say, in reaching out to a number of academic institutions just to explore what eReg versions they're using, I've had them tell me, listen, our monitors won't log in. And so even though we have these eReg options, we're still sitting there doing the over-the-shoulder or printing out, I mean, worse, printing out our electronic documents because they won't log in. And so to circle all the way back to your first point, Fran, putting in the contract, hey, this is how it is going to be at our site. I think it's going to be incredibly important, and I would hope that sponsors support that.
I could chime into that to eliminate that right there, because the system we use I send a report higher than the monitor and say, okay, if they're asking me to print stuff off, I'm going to charge you a fee because she has access to that, or he has access to that. So I put that in my budget. There's a monitor print fee, monitor regulatory fee, however way you want to name it. I put that in my budget so that they know, listen, I'm doing this as a favor for you. Because for these regulatory electronic files are not cheap for the site to purchase. And so I am trying to make it easy. And if I have a monitor that does not, then I usually try to find a project manager and say, listen, he or she has access to it. If you want me to babysit her, you're going to have to pay me to do that.
Love it.
The other thing that I want to bring up, the TMF systems should be able to talk to these different regulatory electronic document storage facilities. I mean, it would be such a streamlined thing. We're uploading these documents. It's all electronic. Let's get together and talk to each other. I mean, there's got to be a plug-in. I mean, my eSource is plugging into it. Everyone else is plugging into it. And EDC is even plugging into my electronic regulatory documents and eSource and eRegs. Why not the TMF system? So, and then—
no reason why not. Seneca, I'm sorry to cut you short. We hopefully have a human hero to give us their perspective on clinical trial participation and records.
Yeah.
I cannot thank you enough for the straight talk, for the valuable perspectives. Hopefully every sponsor on the planet will find this session and listen to the recording eventually. I believe that we have an opportunity to move mountains, and we can do it this year. It's a lot of work to rebuild a taxonomy and acknowledge that different systems are going to do different things. It's a lot of work to do decision trees. This work we're all very capable of, and if we accomplish this work, we can move faster with better quality, full stop.
Yep.
Oliver, I'm relying on you to let us know if we have the opportunity of listening to the other speaker.
You're
on
muted.
mute, my friend.
Unfortunately, I forgot that I was on mute. Unfortunately, Sharon was unable to log back in.
That is not a problem, because Sharon Terry is awesome. We might be able to insert her in another day and hear a little bit about the human hero perspective. Sharon Terry runs something called the Genetics Alliance org, self-serve support. It's an amazing journey, an amazing story. Hopefully, Oliver, we can get it sometime within the TMF week. We've got so many awesome questions for these folks. I'm so excited that she's not here. That didn't sound right, but let's go with it. Do most sponsors have the same kind of site record oversight that they need to have in order to be able to say to the health authorities, we delivered sufficient oversight? Do you, and I'll start with Seneca, are sponsors coming into your system to do the oversight of the CRO efforts that they need to protect themselves against? Oh, that's a beautiful answer.
No.
Okay, I'm gonna take notes. Please go.
I think a couple other people here said the same thing. The sponsors are the genie in the bottle. I mean, we're trying to find them. It's kind of like, if you can break in and find a sponsor's email, you are winning. When it comes to this particular study, it's getting more and more difficult. And so I can guarantee you they're not in our system. It's just a CRO. And I would love, I mean, they can have their unique password and everything that's possible. But no, they're not. They're, at least on my end. I'll let you other guys speak for that.
Perhaps it's time. Go ahead, Etienne.
So there are a few sponsors that are hands-on, but there's not very many. So I can probably name 2 out of the years that I've been working in CROs and AROs that were hands-on. But for the most part, like Seneca was saying, the sponsor is that person that you only go to if something is broken and horrible. And so they're not somebody that you just call up and say, hey, I just wanted to check in and see how things were going. No, they don't do that. The sponsor is like the big bad that you never talk to. So most sponsors aren't hands-on at all. So they don't have the oversight. They don't want to look at the file. They don't want to see what's going on until something is wrong.
Rodwell, what's your experience at George Washington?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's gotten worse. They've become even far more invisible and far more inaccessible. And I think that's problematic. I mean, ultimately, we're all in it to do good research. We're all in it to protect the patients. And we're all in it so that we can find treatments and interventions for these patients. I would think that the sponsors would be a little bit more interested in what the sites are doing and not relying on a middleman who ultimately might not be as trained on the protocol as they think,
I work at a CRO now. It is not our protocol, and we know it. At Advanced Clinical, we try and behave as if we're an arm of the sponsor, but it's the sponsor's responsibility. It's their product. It's their science. It's theirs. We live to serve, and we are not a sponsor. And the sponsors, I think, the pendulum may have swung a little too far in the reliance on third parties to get all the efforts done. I think reflecting back on the communication request, the sponsors still need to outsource for sure. Perhaps there could be a little more dialogue, sponsor to site with the CRO in attendance or whatever vendor it is in attendance, so that everyone can be hearing the same thing at the same time. Communication is so critical. I don't know the solution. I know lots of ideas.
I think that's why the IM is so important to be back in person again.
Yeah.
Just because that's the only time you meet the sponsor.
And what is that time point, Seneca?
That's at the beginning of the study. At the beginning of the study, everyone's standing up there and saying their expectations. Having a Zoom IM is I hate to say it, is a joke, because me having my coordinator in a locked room, some of them I've seen 2 days. You're looking at 16 hours. I have my coordinator locked in a room listening to an IM. I'm guarantee you there's going to be some mental fatigue there.
Yeah, this a little bit for sure. Do you not also hear from the sponsors when the health authorities come knocking?
Oh, well, you get a letter that says, hey, you may be getting audited soon. If you do get audited, please call us. So that's about what we get.
Would it be helpful to hear that an inspection has started? Rod, I think we're almost at time. Let's give you the floor for a minute and whatever reflections you have, please.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the message that I do want to send home is we're not enemies. I think we're all working on the same team, and I think that that's incredibly important. And I do think that that tends to get lost a little bit. And speaking a little bit to what Etienne was saying earlier, is that, because it leads to this sort of back and forth, well, you said, well, this person said, well, he said, it creates this sort of toxic, disinteresting, and it removes the desire to really want to push forward. You know what I mean? And I do think it's important that the sponsors be a little bit more involved with the sites. I understand that everybody's incredibly busy. I know that the sponsors have a big feat and something much bigger, but it's important for us to know who we're working for.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rodwell. Etienne?
I just want to say real quick that we all want the same thing. So just keep that in mind as you're talking to people, and even if you get frustrated, we all want the same thing. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We want a good product that's making people better and healthy for everyone. No one's, we all want the same thing. And as as a sponsor, you want to make money, that's fine. But there's a way to get to it, and we all want the same thing. The only thing I need you guys to take away.
Henri Tremere, do the right thing, the cash will flow. Growing up in clinical trials at Genzyme was a gift from God. I want to take one moment and say to any monitor or clinical trial manager or CTA who's on the call, none of this was intended to bash the incredibly excellent work that you do. If you're CRO side, what you do, what you accomplish is a miracle. We're talking about broadening the perspectives, making sure everybody is respected and heard in the vast, beautiful, juicy universe of clinical trials, and having the taxonomy and the technology support our journeys to get faster, not to make it more complex, and not to push anybody off the table. The table is pretty big. We need 13 nights at the round table, not just 3. And I'm shutting up, Oliver. I could do that forever.
Thank you so much for that ending, Fran. Wow, that was such a great discussion. I felt like it was not only incredibly insightful to those that are sitting on both sides of the table, but it was probably a little bit therapeutic, I think, to maybe just have a very honest discussion. And maybe we're not always able to do that. So what a great panel discussion. Fran, I want to thank you, of course, for steering and being the captain of the ship for this session. But most importantly, I want to thank Radwa, Etienne, and Seneca for such great perspectives. You know, the dialogue was fantastic. My favorite panel so far, absolutely. I really enjoyed that. Of course, if you guys want to continue the discussion, if anybody on the panel would like to continue the discussion, we do have a lounge area on the conference, and jump into that. And maybe the audience can join as well as, you know, and add their own context and ask their own questions. So if anybody wants to continue the conversation, head over to the lounge area. I'm sure Fran will be there.
Oliver, lounge might sound a little bit naughty to the participants from the US of A. I'm just suggesting that a little.
There's no cocktails or food lighting. It's all very, very PC. But there are webcams, so you're able to speak to each other and have a conversation. So head over to that. You don't have to put your camera on, of course, but you can have a conversation and talk with other peers. It's been a lot of fun, so you can head over there. Thank you to everybody that's been attending. You can tell, for the panelists that can see, you can tell that this was a great session because we're getting such great feedback from everybody thanking you for your time. So from everybody from the Montreal side and from the TMF Weekcast, thank you so much for this panel, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for this opportunity.